If you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the business of lifelong learning, you're in the right place. I'm Celisa Steele.
And I'm Jeff Cobb, and this is the Leading Learning Podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 195 of the Leading Learning Podcast, where we talk with Chris McLeod, director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Duke University. Duke happens to be just right down the road from us here in North Carolina. And Jeff, I know you have family members who have been very active with Osher Lifelong Learning there. So you had both professional and personal interest in talking with Chris. What did the two of you cover?
Well, for listeners who aren't familiar with them, we start off talking about what the Osher Lifelong Learning Institutes are. Basically, a little of the history and some background on how they work. And there are more than 120 of them associated with universities and colleges around the country, and we're lucky to have multiple institutes here in North Carolina. Now, Osher Institutes tend to focus on lifelong learners above the age of 50, so Chris and I discussed what the general characteristics are of that group of learners, to the extent that it's possible to generalize, as well as the opportunities and challenges that come with serving them. And as you might expect, we also talk about the Osher Institutes, both at Duke and more broadly, as learning businesses and the factors that tend to underpin the success of the most successful programs.
Osher really does seem to be one of the most, if not the most, recognized names when it comes to lifelong learning programs for older adults. They're obviously doing something right, and so it's really great to add the perspective of this segment of the learning business to the wealth of perspectives we've gathered here on the Leading Learning Podcast so far. And I know listeners are going to benefit from what Chris McLeod has to share, so let's roll the interview.
Hello and welcome to the Leading Learning Podcast. I'm Jeff Cobb, and today I'm joined by Chris McLeod. Chris is director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Duke University, which is right down the road from Leading Learning Global Headquarters. The Institute at Duke is one of the largest and one of the leading lifelong learning institutions in the United States. For any listeners who may not be familiar with Osher Lifelong Learning, we'll definitely cover that as part of the show. But first, Chris, welcome to the Leading Learning Podcast.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, I'm so glad to have you here. We had the chance to meet in person recently, which that was also great. But now to be connecting, I know there are listeners out there who are going to be eager to hear about your work. So to start off with, it'd be great if you could tell listeners a bit more about you and your work. And maybe as part of that, you can give us a brief overview of Osher Lifelong Learning Institutes for those who may not be familiar with them.
Sure. What's really extraordinary is there's actually a network of 123 Osher Lifelong Learning Institutes in the country. They were all endowed by Bernard Osher with the Bernard Osher Foundation. Mr. Osher is a philanthropist who lives in San Francisco, and he and his wife, Barbara, have really been passionate advocates for lifelong learning. And they've basically, approach lifelong learning institutes that have been affiliated with universities, and over time started out making very modest grants to these programs. And over time, as the attendance and membership of these institutes grew, they gave even more support. So most of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institutes have an endowment of somewhere between $1 million to $2 million, which is a really key cornerstone of the financial pro forma of these programs. Duke is, 7 or 8 in terms of the top 10 largest. We have about 2,400 members. The Osher Lifelong Learning Institutes offer non-credit courses, mostly to mature learners, although at Duke, we do not have an age restriction around that. Anybody of any age can take our courses. And again, they're affiliated usually in continuing ed education programs of colleges and universities. I joined OLLI, we also call it OLLI at Duke, last summer in June as a new director. And so this past year has been one of a lot of learning for me as well. My background was primarily fundraising and development. And since Duke has been growing. The membership has been growing significantly. We've been at capacity in terms of our enrollment for several years. So the intention is for us to locate a new facility and expand our classroom offerings.
That's a great position to be in, where you need to find more space, basically. And my understanding is there are more than 120 of these institutes across the U.S., and I think one in pretty much every state, including the District of Columbia. Is that correct? That
is correct. And we actually, in North Carolina, we're fortunate to have three of them: UNC Asheville, NC State, Wilmington, and Duke. Actually, so 4 total. In North Carolina alone. The one thing that's important to understand is that there's a saying at the national conferences, because we all get together about every 18 months, all the directors, is that if you've been to one OLLI, you've been to one OLLI. They all have very different cultures and course offerings and programs. Even our colleagues at NC State have a very robust program, but they tend to have more a la carte single presentation programs, some 3 to 6 week long courses. Duke's kind of recognized for having, and UNC Asheville in particular, have longer courses, 9, 10, 12 week long courses.
Interesting. And now I know, you said that you work with learners. You don't have an age restriction on your learners.
Correct.
But I know that OLLI in general tends to focus over the age of 50 or just, older learners, basically. So, I mean, aside from dropping the emphasis on tests and grades, that are part of typical college and even a lot of, continuing education and professional development type experiences, how do you find that teaching and engaging with learners in the older age group tends to be different from teaching and engaging with younger learners?
Well, actually what our instructors tell us is they love our students because of their level of enthusiasm, the level of engagement and questions that they ask in class. We have a handful, maybe 3 or 4 instructors who teach at the university level, but who also teach for us for free because they love our students and they love the questions that they're asked. I think the best part about what's offered is we don't have to guess what they want. Our members let us know very clearly the types of classes they want. In fact, last summer I remember a member saying that they would love to have a class on the American Constitution. And by the spring term, we were able to find an instructor to teach a 6-week-long class on the American Constitution and constitutional thought. So they're not shy. They'll tell you exactly what they want. We also have a 30-member curriculum committee that is completely responsible for sourcing all of our instructors and navigating, them through the course proposal process. And we teach about 400 classes a year. And I can't take any credit for the courses that are offered. They're all, all of this is done by volunteers in response to what members ask for.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing to have that volume of courses, and as you said, many of those are, most of them, I guess, are multi-week courses. So that's quite a commitment and quite a service that's being provided there. And kudos to the volunteers who are helping to make that happen.
Well, we're also in a community in the Research Triangle Park with 5 or 6 different universities, where you have a real generous, pool of faculty to pull from among graduate students, doctoral students. So we're able to, and a lot of, expert retirees.
That is a great advantage to have in offering lifelong learning. And you mentioned that, the teachers, and I can imagine being in this position as a teacher, it's just so nice to have, students who are engaged and enthusiastic and really want to be there and want to be learning. And as you noted, they'll ask a lot of questions. They'll make known what they want. Are there other commonalities that you see across the types of people who tend to be attracted to this kind of lifelong learning programming?
Well, what we say is there are no prerequisites. People just need to come with a spirit of curiosity. So what we see is there's a lot of hunger for the humanities. There were, among men and women, people who kind of grinded it out in college, to get that accounting degree or sciences degree to go to med school. They're really hungry for the humanities. They want to take classes on poetry, literature, fiction, the arts, performing arts. We also have a pretty robust science offering. I was stunned to discover in the fall catalog there was a course called The History of Calculus. Now,
Wow.
I dropped that class twice in college and have managed to get to through my career without having to use calculus. But I thought it just really intriguing. We've taught courses on organic chemistry. We'll teach classes on Sondheim. All kinds of things. But I think really the arts and that kind of, right brain, watercolors, paint and collage. So it's a real variety.
It sounds like maybe things people didn't get to do enough of earlier in life.
Yeah.
It's funny because I'm a big, literature guy. My whole background is in literature before I got involved in, this world of lifelong learning. But I've been thinking more and more lately as I've gotten older that I really would like to understand science and math better than I do. So I may be showing up at OLLI at some point for that.
Well, I think that's, and maybe that's a better way to frame it, is people are hungry to explore what they didn't explore. If I could take the history of calculus without having to do it or feel like I was going to be graded or it was going to kill my GPA and impact my grad school prospects, I might feel really differently. So it really is all about the joy and love of learning. And so I think our members are incredibly vibrant and enthusiastic and passionate.
If you're aiming to build a vibrant, enthusiastic, passionate community of learners online, we encourage you to check out our sponsor. CommPartners helps learning businesses conceive, develop, and fulfill their online education strategy. Their solutions begin with Elevate LMS, an award-winning learning platform that provides a central knowledge community and drives learner engagement. To extend the value of Elevate, CommPartners provides a wide range of online education services, including curriculum design, instructional design, fully managed webinars, webcasts, live stream programs, and virtual conferences. Find out more at leadinglearning.com/CommPartners. And now back to the interview as Jeff and Chris discuss the role of membership as an element of OLLI's business model.
And you, if I understand correctly, you regard the participants in your programs not just as students, but as members. I mean, you describe them as members. Why is that concept of membership an important part of it? And I don't know if that applies to all.
It does.
Does it apply to all of them?
It applies to all the Osher Lifelong Learning Institutes. And part of, I'll start with initially, it's a key ingredient to the financial pro forma of these lifelong learning institutes. One of the things that Mr. Osher was very thoughtful about, and I appreciate it so much because I've worked in nonprofits of all sizes, but there are 4 legs to financial pillars to the Osher Lifelong Learning Institutes. There's membership, which is anywhere from $35 to $75 a year just to be a member, and that gives you the right to take courses. And then you have course fees, which is another source of revenue. You also have the ability to raise money from your members for specific, efforts like hearing loops or technologies, things to improve the program. And then the 4th is an endowment, which was provided by the Osher Foundation. So having those four streams of revenue really help keep the program very stable. And, the fundraising is really the margin of excellence, like it is in a lot of state universities. If you want to do extra things or like we'll have a very robust campaign for this new facility. But that's the primary driver behind the notion of membership. But we also really talk a lot about the importance of a learning community and for people to feel safe and to feel welcome and affirmed despite what their backgrounds are. We talk a lot about the importance of respect and civility, of balanced perspectives, of kindness and compassion, and what's required to really, truly have a learning community. And I think you'll see that while there may be variances in how we, what our course offerings and activities look like, I would say that this notion of community and face-to-face connection is really a universal theme in all the Osher Lifelong Learning Institutes.
I love that because I feel like that, particularly in more sort of continuing education, traditional continuing education, professional development type programs, you get the content, and a lot of those, it's about getting the credit as well. But it feels like you've created a real sense of culture. Basically, there is a culture of OLLI, and I know people I've met who've participated in it seem to exude that. They definitely like that culture.
We really try to encourage a sense of pride and ownership in it. So it's a, self-governing organization as much as possible.
And you touched on this just a little bit in what you were saying just a moment ago, but my understanding is that individual OLLI programs do have to demonstrate a certain level of success in order to receive, those endowments, that funding that comes from the Osher Foundation. What have you seen as some of the characteristics of the most successful programs?
Well, I would say, if the answer to your first question is typically that has to do with a level of membership.
Okay.
I think early on, organizations had to have a threshold of 500 to even be considered for an early grant, and that was usually several $100,000. And then over time, to reach $1 million, you had to, I think, have membership of 1,000 individuals. And then, our program, I think we're very lucky to be in a very economically vibrant community where a lot of people want to retire. We have outstanding medical facilities, great climate. So, it's interesting at our national conferences, we have folks who are struggling to, boost enrollment, and others of us are trying to manage the challenges of growth. So it's a little bit of both, but I think what makes a huge difference is how well the programs are able to really channel the energies and efforts of our volunteers. Most of us are located in continuing education, which at a leading university is often, not a high priority in terms of funding or strategic support. But we are member, funded and supported. We don't rely on Duke for any resources, but we are able to really channel the energy and effort of volunteers. This program is run with 2 full-time staff and several part-time staff at some of our classroom facilities. But we have over 560 volunteers, who are engaged in really meaningful roles. 300 of those are instructors.
Wow, that's
so it's
impressive.
A lot of leveraged labor.
Yeah, well, that's impressive that you're pulling off the number of offerings that you are with, as you said, two full-time staff. So obviously, great reliance on volunteers, and again, kudos to those volunteers that are helping to make that happen. That said, you are what we would characterize as a learning business, and so for us, that means that you're marketing and charging fees for the learning experiences you deliver, and you just talked a little bit about the membership fee, and then charging for specific learning experiences. What challenges or constraints have you encountered in operating as a business? Are there people who push back against having to pay? What tends to work well when it comes to attracting people to OLLI?
Well, I think we're fortunate, again, to be in a very economically vibrant community. I grew up here in Durham, and I can tell you it was not this hip and happening.
That's probably true, yeah.
When I was growing up. I think some of the challenges is you're working with people in a life stage where they're really, really vibrant and, engaged until something happens. So we can go into a fall semester with 160 courses and, publish a catalog. And by the time classes start 6 weeks later, we can have lost 4 or 5 instructors, either because of their own health issues or health of a spouse. And that's particularly challenging and heartbreaking, for the community, because it happens to not just the members, it happens to all the people who are excited about taking their classes. We don't try to, to get other people to teach the classes, but that kind of, that's a factor in our work. I think our biggest challenge is really managing the growth. We're teaching right now in 23 different facilities in 4 counties. And, many of my peers, have much larger staffs and they're programming one large facility. So I think space is definitely, space and staffing are huge challenges. But we're making some headway on that. And I think our university has a increasingly stronger understanding of what we have to offer the larger university community. So I think we'll be making some progress there. One of the things that I would say as a challenge as a new director is there are, I've always worked with very sophisticated donors in my fundraising, career, people who are very educated, and who often give, millions of dollars and have strong opinions. And it was always my job to listen to that. And it is also an OLLI, but the level of engagement, which of course is the source of strength, can also be a challenge because you're trying to make decisions for a learning community of 2,400 members, and if you're not careful, 3 or 4 want to drive the whole the whole ship. So managing a variety of cultural norms and around communication is another aspect, I think, to my role. Many of the instructors, are facilitators in classes, or that talk about issues in the world today, and I've seen, and we've seen at the national level, the level of incivility is percolating down into PTAs and church communities and OLLIs. And so I think making sure our classrooms continue to be places where people can, have robust debates about issues and still feel safe and respected is something that I think I feel a great deal of responsibility for ensuring the continuation of.
Right. Yeah. And I guess that goes back to that point about culture that we were discussing earlier, and really preserving, sustaining that culture that's going to lead to a supportive learning environment. Have you? I wonder something you said a while back about continuing education departments. These weren't your words, but they tend to sort of be the stepchild of big universities. But I've noticed, and I know you've only been there a year, so I don't know what your perspective is on this, but I feel like major universities are starting to tune in more to this older audience. I know, for example, I went to the University of Virginia, and I didn't used to receive emails from them all about their lifelong learning programs, and now I get them all the time, which makes me think this is becoming a higher priority. Do you sense that?
It absolutely is. And even at Duke, there's an effort now to basically re-envision continuing ed. It is a profit center in a lot of universities. It's also a way of staying engaged with your alumni. And that's important from a development, fundraising perspective, as well as just the vibrancy of the alumni body to support students' internships and extracurricular activities. So I do think, I say that only having worked at a business school that, saw the university as simply annoying. This was at another university. But they really saw themselves as an independent kind of profit center, and their norms and way of doing things were very different from the rest of the university. I think there's a lot of freedom in continuing ed. So for me, I think that Duke, there are also in every school, professional school here at Duke, there are continuing education efforts. And what is unclear down the road is what will happen if there's some effort to try to coalesce and bring those together to share resources. I'm not really sure about the status of that, but I think that's happening at other universities. There's a lot more distance learning and a lot of resources being brought to bear. I do think the majority of Osher lifelong learning institutes are really focused on in-classroom, in-person learning. There's some experimentation and conversations going on about ways we could broadcast what we're already doing. But I would still say that's a pretty nascent effort nationally.
If your learning business is committed to experimenting and analyzing the results to find out what really works, be sure to check out our sponsor for this quarter, Authentic Learning Labs is an e-learning company that offers products and services to help improve your current investments in education. One key product is Authentic Analytics, a dedicated suite of visualization reports to help analyze and predict the performance of education programs. Organizations use Authentic Analytics to easily scan through volumes of data in intuitive visuals, chart performance trends, and quickly spot opportunities, issues, and potential future needs. Find out more at leadinglearning.com/authentic. And now back to the interview as Jeff asks Chris about new approaches and initiatives that OLLI at Duke University may pursue in the coming years.
Well, and I was going to ask, because I know you're wrestling with space issues, obviously, and you're coming up with some ways to address that. But distance learning would be an obvious, way to have more capacity. Sounds like you're at least thinking about that, though, in early stages. Are there any other big plans that you have in the coming 1 to 5 years for new approaches you're going to take or new things that you're going to be doing?
Well, I think right now the building is really the number one priority because, of our constraints. And we feel like once we were able to pull people together and create a greater sense of social connection, one thing that's interesting nationally, and I'm sure this is on the radar screen of your audience, is, more baby boomers are aging alone than any other time in history. Part of that is they're late to marry, quick to divorce, and they had fewer children, and they were all about independence and autonomy. And so there's a real hunger. And part of this is also what's happening in terms on Facebook and electronic communities, but there is a real hunger for face-to-face connection. And in seniors, it has a huge impact on their health and mortality. They're saying people who are socially isolated and lonely have a much greater chance of early death than, people who smoke, 3 packs of cigarettes or are chronically obese. It's that serious of a health risk. So we're really focused on creating space where our members can be together. I do think over time, this idea of distance learning will become more of a priority. Right now, we're serving people who are healthy enough to get in their car and drive to one of our classroom sites. I think down the road, I can see these retirement communities, continuing care retirement communities, or what we call CCRCs, or active adult communities, wanting the ability to broadcast into a single classroom where people could be face-to-face, but they wouldn't have to get on the interstate and drive 30 minutes from Raleigh or Pittsburgh to take in one of our classes. So I think that's inevitable. We have a lot of creative, folks with IT backgrounds who are experimenting and doing some videotaping and actually even some podcasts. So I expect our members will help us, at least launch that effort.
Right. Yeah, it seemed as you were talking, I was thinking an analogy there is what often happens with church or synagogue or mosque, whatever you happen to be involved in. That particularly as people get older, very often they get very involved in that, and that is their social community, and they want to be there. Or at least this has been sort of a traditional thing. I'm sure it's probably declining, but eventually they reach a point where they just can't. Right. But they still want that involvement, and technology perhaps provides an avenue for doing that. So
well, and whereas I might not want to turn on the TV and watch a church service, it may be meaningful if you're watching your church's service and your minister preach. And so I think one of the things we have yet to test is, we have some beloved instructors, and there are people who would love just to hear the audio of it. Right. They know what Dr. Wendell Musser looks like and his passion for Roosevelt and Churchill. And so they don't have to have a fancy, broadcast of it. I think just listening would be really powerful enough in some cases, but I think we've got to figure that out.
Yeah, definitely.
And the nice part of being part of the Osher Lifelong Learning Network is that we can share resources with each other. So one of the things that we've been talking about doing is developing an app, just to help our members understand, what's being offered, social events, and stay more in touch with what we're doing. And the exciting thing is I could make one phone call to Chicago and find out who else is doing one. And there's only one other program that was, but there's a lot of shared information. So when I'm trying to, launch a new program or something, we have a national listserv. I can go out there and talk to the 3 people who are doing exactly what I want to replicate, and they'll give me all their information. No copyright, nothing. It's just, so there's a lot of shared efficiencies. And the colleagueship is really, as a professional, is just extraordinary.
And you just mentioned this, and it's a good thing to highlight that you do have this National Resource Center that's at Northwestern. Is that correct?
Yes. And we have monthly webinars on a variety of topics. They send out monthly newsletters. There's only 3 staff in the center, but there's someone who manages all the online learning for the executive directors, as well as an executive director of the Resource Center, and someone who plans, the conferences, which we do every 18 months.
Right. That's just so powerful to have that sort of coordinating, central resource center, but then this network of, more than 120 different institutes to be able to learn from each other. Just very powerful in terms of
it really is. Yeah, I was fortunate to attend 2 conferences within the first 3 months, and it made an enormous difference because there are very few people in my continuing education program that really knew much about OLLI. So they could help me navigate the IT platforms and the university's HR. But when it came to the day-to-day work on the programs, I really relied on my assistant and the national office.
Well, that's great. And it sounds like you've settled in well and now have good work ahead of you. So it's been great to have you on and hear about what you're doing. I'll switch gears just a little bit. It's not too much of a shift because we've been talking about lifelong learning all along, but now I want to shift to your own lifelong learning and to a question that we ask of all of our guests here on Leading Learning. Nobody gets away without answering this, and it's one that does focus on your personal learning. So here's the question: what's one of the most powerful learning experiences you personally have been involved in as an adult since finishing your formal education?
Mm-hmm. It's I have to really reference the 2 years prior to coming to this role. I had my own business, which it was a very powerful learning experience. But
that is powerful.
But my mom was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and I decided to come home and help my dad take care of her for several months. And that was a really powerful learning experience, both in terms of the, group of OLLI members that I came to work with, my level of compassion and understanding of what they are navigating day to day, or what they're headed toward, despite whatever levels of denial they may be engaged in, was really, really powerful. It taught me the importance of presence and listening, and how that's really a superpower in your business. Is I don't have to have the brilliant ideas, but I need to be able to listen to people who really want to make a difference and want courses to happen here. I also think it really helped me understand the importance of learning to receive support. I think I was raised in a generation where, in the 80s in particular, when I got out of law school, where there was just pressure, to achieve and this focus on independence and autonomy. And I don't think I really understood the power of community or would allow people to help and support me. And I think that experience really helped me understand how much richer my life and our family's life was when we were able to let my parents' community support us. And that was a key lesson even for this job, because I have always taken a lot of pride in ownership of my work. And here it's very clear that it's the work of the OLLI community, and that my work is to support the members in creating the kind of community and learning they want, not what I would choose as the director. So it really, I think, was humbling and helped me understand the importance of bringing your heart to work. So.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I know, more and more people are in that position, similar to yours, where having to be a caretaker for a parent or somebody else in their family who's aging or sick or both. In fact, when you and I met in person for the first time, which was just 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was at a caretaker conference that I know OLLI was involved in. And that was a very inspiring environment for me to listen to some of the people who were speaking and what their experiences had been. And I can definitely understand at a personal level, why that's such a powerful learning experience. So again, thanks for sharing that. And thanks again for coming on the show. If listeners want to learn a little bit more about you and about your work at OLLI at Duke, where should they go?
So we have a website. It is www.learnmore.duke.edu/OLLI. And that will get you to the OLLI website. I will warn you, it is, a little too text heavy. It's, we can do better, but that will give you an idea. You're also welcome to call the office and ask for a catalog. That number is 684-2703, and we can mail a catalog. OLLI at Duke is really proud of our catalog. Among OLLIs, it's kind of epic. It's almost 90 pages for the fall, and so those are the two best ways to learn about it.
Okay, well, yeah, I can imagine the catalog is important when you have as many offerings as you do.
Yeah, and people like to see it. They like to feel it. So we post it online about a month before it's actually printed and is in their hands. But we're not abandoning that anytime soon. Okay, well, that probably fits your audience well, and we'll be sure to put the link to the website and the phone number, both of those in the show notes, so that folks can access those easily. So, well, great. Well, Chris, thanks so much for being a guest on Leading Learning. Thank you, Jeff, and thanks for the work that you're doing.
That concludes the interview with Chris McLeod. To get show notes, go to leadinglearning.com/episode 195. When you check out the show notes, you'll also see various options for subscribing to the podcast. And if you're getting value out of what you hear, we'd be truly grateful if you would subscribe, as it helps us get some data on the impact of what we're doing. We'd also be grateful if you would take just a minute to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Go to leadinglearning.com/Apple. That will put you in the right place. You can also leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you happen to use to listen to Leading Learning. Jeff and I personally appreciate your ratings and reviews, but more importantly, they play a really big role in helping the podcast show up when people search for content on leading a learning business. And we'd be grateful if you check out our sponsors for this quarter. They help to make Leading Learning possible. So find out more about Authentic Learning Labs at leadinglearning.com/authentic, and find out what CommPartners has to offer at leadinglearning.com/CommPartners. Finally, please tell others about the podcast. You can send a tweet by going to leadinglearning.com/share. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/leadinglifelonglearning. You can like us there and share us with others on Facebook. However you do it, please spread the word about Leading Learning. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on the Leading Learning Podcast.